Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 103. We're going to be talking about Stranger Things Season 4, Part 2. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. That's WHATTHE at scarythoughts.org. Been getting a lot more emails from people lately. Thanks so much for writing in, especially for the... we posed the question when Chad rediscovers his love of cannabis after a year of, quote, sobriety. What movie should we cover in that return? And a lot of people have responded. Well, we'll get back into that later. Thanks for reaching out, everybody. We kind of have a plug this week.
Yeah, I'd like a shout out to our bros at the Liverpool Horror Club, and they're actually in Liverpool, England, which is interesting. But they sent us a couple t-shirts, which are fucking great. I'm a sucker for logos done death metal style.
Totally.
And a few other things they sent. They have a film fest. They do film events out over there.
Liverpool. That's where Frankie Goes to Hollywood is from.
Is it?
Yep.
I thought it was,
and other bands.
Yeah.
Other less important bands.
Yeah, this is a pretty mediocre 60s band from there, I think, right?
Yeah, and also to really give credit, shipping anything overseas right now is outrageously expensive. So that was actually like extra generous of you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks. Is that it? Should we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into this this treat of a season-ending banger.
Yeah, so spoilers ahead. So Chad, where do you want to start with this one?
I think that this show has really rallied, and I quite enjoyed the last two episodes.
Yeah.
Way more than I thought I would, considering how like kind of lukewarmish I was on the beginning part of the show, which I think is just a consequence of how long the episodes were and how sober I was. Because I watched the last two while on a 3-day mushroom bend.
Really?
Bender. Yeah. So I had a lot more pleasant feelings towards the show and the universe in general.
Gross. So you are still off cannabis, but mushrooms are okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm not like, it's not like a sober year challenge. It was just like a no pot.
Going fucking straight edge.
Yeah. No thanks. I've come to realize, like, like chickens eat pebbles to be able to digest their food.
I did not know this.
Yeah. So chickens will eat little rocks and stuff, and it moves around in their stomach. A lot of birds do, but chickens in particular.
Yeah.
I feel like drugs serve the purpose of the pebbles to broader culture. Like they allow you to more comfortably digest everything around you, especially television.
That's fair.
Yeah. But overall, a lot of my complaints of like the first half of the season, I think were really met. Like Argyle really rallied.
Which one's Argyle?
He's the stoner dude.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was great stuff.
Yeah, I didn't have high hopes for it, but I mean, for me, even the Master of Puppets moment, I kind of thought was cute.
Yeah, how did you not like that?
I didn't know it was coming. I think if I knew it was coming, I would have been predisposed to be angry at it. But when it happened, I actually thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah, I guess we're going to get into that scene right at the jump, but I love in broader culture how pleased and happy Metallica and Metallica fans were with it.
Oh, yeah?
Like everybody's like, yeah, this fucking song rules, and now everybody knows it rules, which is in total contrast
to sad art fucks like me.
Yeah, these Kate Bush fucks who are like, I liked that song. I can't believe you don't know what that song is. And now that you know what it is, I'm mad that you know what it is. And it was just like, I was like, yeah, you guys are lame. Heavy metal is the greatest.
Although I can't make a very good argument for it, but I thought the Master of Puppets moment was a lot more interesting and in keeping with what that song is in a weird way than the Kate Bush thing, which, I mean, I'll say it again, but it could have as easily been Never Gonna Give You Up or a Tina Turner song. Like it.
So I was thinking that you had said that on the last episode, and
maybe you said it.
No, you said it.
Okay.
Because I don't really have any strong feelings about Kate Bush or the song.
Yeah.
I think she probably made more money off of this than she did even the height of her career playing bass in Four Non Blondes.
What is happening?
That happened, right? Like that's what it says on Wikipedia.
Does it really?
I don't think so.
I mean, that would be hilarious if it did. Well, it just reminds me of the How Did This Get Made guys somehow got their fans to start changing Stellan Skarsgård's Wikipedia entry to be Stellar Skateboard. And it was just this, it ended up, his Wikipedia page ended up getting locked because people just kept changing his name to Stellar Skateboard. So dumb.
So stupid, but it's so pleasing in its dumbness. But what I was going to say is I watched a lot of behind the scenes, like creator footage of this season because there were things about it I was just really interested in and things that I had theories about. I was like, oh, is it going to be confirmed or not? But how you said, like, it could have been any song. They said that, like, the only song they ever considered for that was Master Puppets.
Yeah.
And it was like, they were like, that's it. We have to do whatever it takes to get it. And they got it. And then that dude, I guess, plays guitar. So he actually plays most of it except for some close-ups of the solo, which I guess were pretty difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard song to play.
Yeah, but he looked competent holding a guitar, which, not to be a schmuck, but when you're a musician, you look for those things. Mm-hmm. Like, how is that person hitting a hi-hat? How is that person holding a guitar, etc.? Yeah. And he looked like he holds a guitar.
Yeah, he could have been a teenage kid playing that song.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then I liked how, like, him and Dustin, their costumes were, like, vaguely medieval. Like, they have the silhouettes of medieval things. Yep. Like, the hoodie that they had on looks like chainmail over his head and stuff like that. And then the rest of the costumes for this whole period of the show were so Red Dawn. Yeah. And the Conan sword at the end, I was like, man, John Milius is really getting his, like, praise in this season. I guess it was like this set of episodes hit so many things that I really personally love that I was just completely, like, won over. Like, it's like, how could you not be won over? Flamethrowers. I fucking love flamethrowers.
Flamethrowers really satisfying. Yeah. But I think for me, what really made part 2 vindicate season 4 for me is that actually just the pace fucking picked up.
Yeah, it really jammed through.
Yeah. And it's not even just that the pace of action picked up because, there were just literally more action sequences, but actually, like, the dialogue got tighter. The exposition, with some exceptions, got tighter. The dynamics between characters wasn't just so laboriously drawn out by writing and actors that aren't maybe up for the task for a long, laborious exchange.
Well, something else we had talked about in the last episode was that we thought that the John Hughes vibe might have just not been, like, totally the wheelhouse of the Duffer Brothers or the kids that acted.
Yep.
But the ensemble adventure certainly is. I mean, they, like, completely nail, like, how much attention each character got. People got really satisfying, like, heroic moments. To me, it was just like a movie like Willow or The Barbarians or something like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I will say, though, there was too much exposition, and I didn't really have a good tight thought on this until I watched a Screen Rant video. Some guy who was a guest on Screen Rant said this. He pointed out and I can't believe I'm going to refer to Star Wars, so forgive me, everybody, using Star Wars as a touchstone of anything quality. But he referred to the I am your father" line from Empire Strikes Back, which is basically, he says one thing and the entire plot changes and the context of all the relationships are different now. As opposed to in season 4 of Stranger Things, where everything has to be explained for 20 minutes for relationships to get changed, especially the Vecna backstory and explanations. There's just all this, like, laborious, endless exposition. I don't want to overstate it.
It had a really heavy, like, American Horror Story vibe. You know, like, there's like there's an episode in American Horror Story every season where they just fucking explain everything to you,
right?
And it kind of, like, ruins the mystery.
I agree.
And it's like the tipping point of the season, and then the characters kind of come together to solve the problem. Like, I thought that was very unsatisfying in the Vecna character.
Yeah, and to the point of the person I'm referring to, whose name I'm forgetting. Vecna could have said 2 sentences, and we get it. He's mad and he's evil.
Yeah.
Why? Move on. You know.
I liked the character a bit more than I had liked it before, because there's a bit more of like a cosmic horror vibe. You have this character who you didn't need to know shit about that just gets lost on the shores of an alien horizon and then comes back changed. And I thought that was kind of, you don't need to know about the spiders and his fucking dad and all that dumb shit. Like, it's just another kid had been blasted into another universe and he came back fucking wild.
Well, I'm glad you said cosmic horror, because I felt, and I know I'm projecting onto it how it should have done it to be better, but this is just to my taste. I feel like it would have been a better season, and certainly part 2 would have been better if it was more Lovecraftian. And not because I love Lovecraft or I love weird fiction, but because the more we stare at Vecna's face and the more he talks and the more time we spend in the Upside Down and stare at all that CGI, the more information we get about him, the less scary he is. And there's a sort of, I feel like there's a tipping point where, a really lush backstory can create the background for horror. And there's also a tipping point where lines delivered from an expressive face can communicate a lot. But if it's sort of a hodgepodge of CGI and prosthetics and makeup, you start to get these layers that you can't access the humanity behind. It becomes, there's a diminishing returns in it. And so he is less human because of all the prosthetics, but he's not more mysterious. He's actually less mysterious because we're staring at makeup and prosthetics the whole time. He's an elemental evil, but actually he's just some guy in a mask. And the more we stare at the guy in the mask, the less elemental he is. Again, we were talking about exposition. The more exposition there is, the less mystery there is. And to me, the less mystery there is, the less horrifying it is.
Yeah.
Not as a total rule, but I felt like that really applied to this.
Yeah,
like the more we're staring at Vecna, the less mystery, the less scary. The more exposition, the less mystery, the less scary. And again, I did like these episodes quite a bit, but they weren't scary. And I mean, maybe they weren't supposed to be, but I felt like it was more interesting when he was this like wrathful unknown. And and there's a little bit of the I don't need so much of his backstory. It doesn't make him more interesting.
Yeah, like I thought the fact that he just goes, like I was saying before, like that he just goes into the landscape and comes back changed, I thought was cool.
Yeah.
And then I definitely like the tone of the Upside Down changes quite a bit. Now it's basically like a heavy metal album cover.
Yeah.
Like it pretty much could be Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell.
Very much so.
Like, or like a Sword album cover or something like that. And I kind of liked that for the show. It went from being like this like haunted thing to now it's just he's like the puppet of this unknowable thing. It just worked for me. Like those scenes where he's just like exploring it almost had like a Dr. Manhattan vibe to me. Like he started to like lose his humanity. It still doesn't make any of the thing like him like killing his family or whatever the fuck happened. It seemed kind of unnecessary. And also like how does he end? I still am not totally clear how he ended up in the program to begin with. Like that whole thing didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I thought the 11 secret compound stuff was a little wonky and not as interesting as the rest of the show.
Yeah, his story arc-ish is also sort of becomes a staple of so many superhero narratives. Like just who's the villain in the last Doctor Strange movie?
I haven't seen
Red
it.
Witch, Scarlet.
Oh, the Scarlet Witch.
Yeah. So like so many supervillains and superheroes in the MCU and DC, they undergo a transformation and lose their humanity, or they dance along the edge of losing their humanity. And that is what drives the plot of so many. Not Spider-Man, but a lot of them, even the superheroes. And so that storyline for Vecna is a little bit rote at this point. Like, yeah, he's a supervillain. if we look at his backstory, he's sympathetic and he lost his way.
Yeah.
Name that supervillain. All
Yeah.
of them. Every single one of them.
It reminds me that like the Avengers spoof in Rick and Morty, where they all have the same backstory and it's completely interchangeable.
Absolutely.
It's pretty much like this. Yeah. It's funny too, like the characters like the Scarlet Witch, they go in Marvel, they go through periods of time where they're heroes and villains and they kind of go back and forth. Yeah. Like Scarlet Witch, I believe, was a villain originally. And it's interesting to see like that character get so much play throughout the MCU. It was originally kind of just like not a very interesting side character, and now like that character's subplot is really like key to like a lot of the goings ons of like, I guess it's like stage 4 or whatever the fuck it is now.
Like stage 4 cancer.
Post Robert Downey.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think of Eleven's story in season 4, the acting in season 4, and what you think's going to happen to that actor.
Do you mean her?
Her.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. We were talking about like which of these child actors are going to be the breakout star and which is going to be the drug addict.
I think she's the Corey Feldman of the cast.
You think so?
Yep.
Huh. Interesting.
If Corey Feldman was insufferable on set.
Right. Because she's supposed to be kind of a bad person in real life.
It might be framed that way. It might be just people looking for something to write about. And I really don't spend any time with Star News or anything, but I watched like 30 seconds of interviews, like snippets of interviews with her, and she could be young enough that she can go down the dark road of the child star. Also, in an era where leaning into being a populist villain is something that can win you a presidency, let alone more film deals or reality show deals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about her. She seems somewhat talented, maybe. I don't think she's that great. I think she's a little overvalued in the show and in the popular consciousness. But I could also see that every entertainment outlet writing articles about what a little shit she is might not deter her and get her to course correct and maybe work on being easier to get along with and not be a narcissist.
I don't know, man.
In interviews. And maybe sort of, unfortunately, in this era, it's like people want that of stars so often that it might be more enticement to behave that way.
Yeah, I'm so disconnected from like celebrity stuff. I don't even know. I mean, I feel like I only a couple of days ago saw some sort of like headline that was like her being rude to someone on set.
Yeah.
And that's as deep as I went. I didn't look at the article at all. Like, I don't know. I don't really pay attention to it. I mean, to me, if I were to guess who was going to be the child, I guess maybe her. I don't know. She's like usually it's like the biggest star ends up being like cast away, and it's somebody kind of a minor person that rises up and becomes like sort of a big deal. Like if you look at the cast of Freaks and Geeks as an example, like, Seth Rogen may be the most famous and successful financially out of all of them. Maybe. Yeah. Like, and then James Franco has fallen off into the hinterlands of sadness and Me Tooing. And you would have thought he would have been like the star coming out of that.
Well, he held that title for a while.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I thought that she was like convincing. Like, I thought she was pretty good when she was young. I was like, oh, she's a really interesting to watch actress. So maybe she'll go like a Haley Joel Osment kind of direction.
Who's that?
The kid from Sixth Sense.
The little boy?
Yeah, the little boy who's like so good in that movie, and then just is now sort of like a side character in Kevin Smith movies.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, could be. I don't know. The whole child actor thing is weird. It just seems that the emotional intelligence and charisma that it takes to be an actor when you're a tween or younger has nothing to do with being an actor as an adult. Like, they're just completely, I don't mean skill sets like the way you learn how to use a hammer and a nail, but an internal skill set and an emotional and developmental skill set that they're actually completely different things.
You know who I thought had a great scene in the season. It was the actor that plays Lucas. I thought he has been trash this whole show. And I thought like the scene where the girl's dying and he's holding her was really like pretty emotional and really just well done. I was like, oh, I kind of believe him as this like character who just got done with this like horrible fight with this really scary person and, you know, is losing this person that he actually really, really cares about. Yeah, I thought that was a surprise.
Yeah.
I was surprised at how sad I felt when she was they should have killed her though. Like that would have been, I think, so much more effective if they had just let her go.
What's the expression? What kind of armor? Narrative armor? Story armor?
I don't know.
Never mind.
Speaking of deaths, sad to see Eddie Munson get the axe. But I think that makes it better.
Bright and beautiful.
Yeah, just burn out. Better to burn out than to fade away.
Yeah.
Much like the Kurgan in Highlander.
Don't know what that is. Never will.
What? Have you not seen Highlander?
Of course I've seen Highlander.
Okay.
I just don't retain any of it. Like I'm not going to remember anything about Stranger Things in a year.
Man, I could probably recite most of Highlander.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that with the amount of pride that you just took.
I think it's thoroughly private. It's actually my favorite rock soundtrack of all time is the Queen's Highlander soundtrack. I think it's so great.
I don't think I know it.
One Vision. It's kind of magic. Man, it's good. All the way through. It's a great soundtrack.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. I do not remember it. So I had a conversation with actually my friend Jesse, who I mentioned last episode, who gave me a great idea to speak about. He gave me another thing to chew on with regards to this series. You know, we were talking again about my issues around if our listeners listen to my rant last episode about the whole needle drop on 80s songs and how I'm completely sick of it, and I'm not going to revisit that. But
yeah, we were real grumpy douches on the last episode.
Well, it fucking deserved it. If it was a better show, I mean, we're not like that now because the last 2 episodes were better. I blame Stranger Things. He was sort of saying like, well, what if 80s music was better? And I was sort of talking about like, I think I try really hard not to think of 80s music because that was the music of my adolescence, and we all sort of glom onto the music we listened to when we were adolescent. Like most people just do that and have this inborn sense that music was at its prime coincidentally when you were in your adolescence. And he said, he was sort of saying like, well, what if music in the 80s was in a certain sense better? Not objectively, but like there was such a thing as a Renaissance. There was such a thing as the Dark Ages. There are zeitgeists. Sometimes things coalesce and the bar is set higher at certain times in history. And it might actually be, despite my mistrust of my own privileging of music from certain musics from the 80s, that I always want to go like, no, it wasn't better in the 80s. That's just my inbred feeling because of when I was born. And it's not better or worse than any other era. He was sort of challenging that and going like, well, no, maybe actually you were adolescent when music was kind of at one of its peaks.
Oh man, you're getting dangerously close to my great art theory.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
And it's upsetting. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting to like this thing where people are always talking about these eras and we keep going back to the 80s. And I have a lot of, criticisms of what, mistrust of why that's happening. Major labels just using back catalog rather than investing in new talent. There are a lot of reasons why the 80s is being just so heavily mined and milked for reasons that have actually nothing to do with the actual music and how good it is, whatever good means. But to his point, that I kind of is making me question a lot of things is, well, maybe it actually was a really, really high point for pop music. And it actually does resonate with more people in a way that is undeniable.
Well, I mean, I certainly believe in epochs and hierarchy of art. So it's definitely to my liking, this turn away from the subjectivity virus that you acquired doubtlessly in San Francisco art school.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a little bit of my buddy Tim George. He had posted this thing. He's pretty hard line in his like true beauty versus, the horde of morons like elevating nonsense. And he had like a thing where he had like a picture of some like beautiful like 1930s coupe and then like a Yugo. And he's like, if there isn't real beauty, these cars look the same, which I thought was like, and kind of, I was looking at it, I was like, what would I, if I was going to disagree with this, like, what would I say? And I would have to mobilize all kinds of goofy shit like, well, the Yugo actually is less resource intensive or whatever. It's not about beauty anymore.
Right.
You have to like add all this learned bullshit on top of it.
Yes.
But I think when you think about music of the 80s, like just technologically, right? Like you have the most instruments, like you have all the new synth stuff coming online, all the new drum machines. Yep. It's done on tape, so it sounds better. I think that like to even get into a studio, you would have had to have like proven yourself a little bit. It's not like everybody has SoundCloud, everybody's throwing shit up. I think that there was like to even get recorded and get into airplay, like there were so many gatekeepers. And I think it's one of the arguments for gatekeepers is, it's keeping all this trash at bay.
But with just enough access that there's a DIY spirit pushing it at the back end. There's like all of this DIY activity that is then pressing against those gatekeepers.
Yeah, totally. You have like the DIY ethos of punk rock and hip hop emerging at that time, making it suddenly possible. And then you have scenes like the New York scene where an explicitly pop group like Blondie can reach out and pull up Grandmaster Flash. Like I think it's just a really unique moment in history. It's certainly better than what's going on now. I would imagine. I mean, there's a lot of like, I think there's a lot of talent going around, but it's so misguided. Like there's this guy, The Do. He makes YouTube videos, and he's probably like one of the best guitar players I've ever seen in my entire life.
But wait, before you finish, let me guess. Before you finish that sentence, is he playing video game soundtrack music?
Yes. Ha! Yeah. And he's doing it on Omegle. Like, so
on a what?
Omegle is like this like app where people just like, it's like chat rooms, like video chat rooms face to face. So you just scramble through and all of a sudden you're talking to some other teenager and wherever. Yeah. And it's usually like these like really bored Billie Eilish girls and these like totally stoked like Logan Paul wannabe kids and just going through. And he's famous enough to where people sort of recognize him, but he'll disguise himself for a little bit. And he'll be like, hey, name something you want me to play on guitar. And they'll try to stump him. They'll be like, I want to hear the second season theme song from Attack on Titan. And he'll just like rip it out. Like, so, and I was like, man, all that talent, essentially he's like doing like an act, like a Branson, Missouri type of act where you would call out to the audience and be like, name a song. And
I think this is making me think of, so in the 70s, we had all these variety shows where famous people would host their own variety shows and other famous people would come on and they would perform pop songs of the era or slightly earlier era, but slightly disco-y or with an orchestra or whatever. And it was sort of a mix of like crooner show tunes, pop music. It was all just a hodgepodge with comedy sketches.
Yeah,
and
Johnny
stuff like
Cash
that.
had one.
Yep. And in retrospect, it's totally charming. At the time, it was despicable. It's fucking the lowest hanging fruit of the entertainment orchard. Did that make sense? And I feel like this might not be so far off because in those variety shows, there is no question there's incredible talent in the air, and they're bringing together a lot of pretty remarkable people who are also crossing paths with people who are famous for no good reason. Yeah, it might not be too far distant between the two things.
I mean, but then if I were to like counter what I just said, I went to school with guys. There were a couple of kids I went to school with who were like guitar virtuosos. And they were so fucking good. They could play all these Metallica songs and stuff. And they didn't really do anything. And because it was like, for whatever reason, maybe a band wasn't in their future. One kid was like, just looked a bit like Meatloaf, you know what I mean? And that's cool for Meatloaf, but for everybody else, it's not, especially in the 90s. And so if you're not like heroin chic, grunge skinny in the 90s, you're probably going to fucking not be famous. So you end up just going to like run a Best Buy or whatever, so maybe if this had been an opportunity for that guy, it would have spurred that. And then, I think we also have to be, we have to think about that, like right now, somebody's like, fingering their first girlfriend to Fetty Wap. And that song is going to be really important to them because of that moment. And we're not having these peak experiences anymore because we're older.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, would be very curious if I live another 30 to 40 years to see how the 80s versus, let's say, the aughts or the teens are regarded in terms of when pop music and rock were at an apex, or hip hop for that matter. But also something we were talking about before we started recording is this sort of virtuosic Brazilian jiu-jitsu moves that things have been moving very quickly where people are developing all these crazy skills. And I do think that if you look at skateboarding, guitar playing, almost anything where there's a skill set involved, we are seeing this rapid increase where, okay, a perfect example is like you look at Tony Hawk talking about the history of skateboarding, for example. He's one of the greatest skateboarders ever, and he's watching kids doing things that he never, ever would have been able to do. The skill set, the creativity might not be there, but the skill set has been accelerating at a faster and faster rate where, tweens are doing things that he wasn't able to do until his 30s, right?
Yeah. This is straight up the Kali Yuga, that like in the age of Kali Yuga, that the darkness and everything that's terrible won't be as bad as it's ever been, but the path to enlightenment is faster and more intense.
Can you break that down a little more?
I mean, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but it went by so fast for me.
Oh, well, like I think that like with all the terrible shit that happens in the world, there's all these accelerationist elements, and they're not always all bad. Sometimes they're good. Like I think that kind of touches on my garbage in, garbage out model of skill development and artistry. Is like you have people who have the potential for genius at the youngest ages possible, being exposed to the greatest people possible for free. And it's gonna create like miraculous performance in pretty much everything. Right. But are they ballasted by cultural movements in a way that has created the type of art we like in the past? Like a kid could come up right now being the greatest reggae guitar player of all time, but have no connection to like Jamaican freedom movements in the way that like Bob Marley would. It's just this weird like skill set divorced. But we're too old to feel the currents that are emerging. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a paradigm shift that is, one, invisible to me, and B, did I say one or A?
It doesn't matter. You're too old to remember.
Roman numeral 2, invisible to me. Wait, I've totally lost my way. Let me start over. It's invisible to me. Also, I don't care about what it is, even if I saw it. And part of me thinks that I've said this before, so pardon my repetition, but like, I sort of love that if something genuinely original and unique was happening in art, I probably wouldn't even recognize it or think it was any good because I'm just too old. All my priorities are just in the dust. But I do feel pretty strongly that, for example, an incredibly gifted, skilled guitar player playing video game soundtrack music is impressive for skill and completely banal in terms of creativity, pushing culture in a unique direction. I'm not saying it's not pushing culture. I'm not saying it's not part of a culture. And I'm definitely saying it's not part of an interesting culture to me. That is absolutely the case. But I mean, it doesn't seem important. It doesn't seem to be saying something, and it doesn't seem to be doing the thing that I think art that is interesting has always done, which is ask questions and propose challenges to the people in the audience.
Yeah.
There's no question being asked there. And again, that might be an old school paradigm of having this idea that art is a form of avant-garde, and that avant-garde is supposed to challenge authority and challenge our ideas about who we are and where we've been and what it is to be alive. And maybe that's an outmoded way of thinking about art. But I also I'm pretty confident it is. I'm pretty confident that's perennially, I don't want to say the job of art, but when art is really, really doing something important, that it tends to push us.
Yeah. I mean, you also have to consider, though, like the economics of the time, too. You know, like this, it's never been easier to become wealthy with your talent than
what?
Yeah. If you have talent,
I feel like it's the total opposite.
Well, what I was about to say is it's never been easier. Like you could right now give yourself a task if you're 14 years old. You're like, I want to become the greatest at X, and I'm going to film my journey to it. And you will have a platform, and you could make a living off of these platforms in some way. Like you don't need anything else except for your personal drive.
To understand, but don't lose your place. But to parse, there's a differentiation here between easy and commonplace.
Well,
right?
I guess like what I would say is
it's easy, but one in a bazillion.
What right? But like it's not just one in a bazillion. Like there are like thousands of dudes that do exercise videos on YouTube that make livings off of it. Like there's like thousands of girls that play drums, you know, that are influencers that are probably making some sort of living. But if you don't have the drive to push yourself through that door that is wide open, it's not like New York in the 70s where you can go live in a cool artist loft for free. You're condemned to the Taco Bell gulags, you know? So like I would say that if you don't make it, it's worse than it's ever been, you know?
I'm very skeptical that any of those quote creators, not any, I'm very skeptical that many of those creators are actually making much money. And I think it's also worth noting that it is incredibly precarious.
I'm not saying it's not precarious. It's super precarious. But I would say, do you think, this would be an interesting stat to look up, but like, do you think there had been more middle class to rich artists or musicians in particular throughout music history or now? Like,
It's so hard to say because...
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. I think it depends on the medium. I think it depends on... It almost changes decade to decade.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's so hard to say. I do know that it depends how you read the statistics, but for musicians, this is like the worst time to be a musician in the history of humanity. Economically. Not really, but probably since the 60s or something. And again, depends on how you want to read the statistics, but also that doesn't erase the fact that there are avenues for making actually quite a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the biggest musicians on YouTube, for example, they're hustling really hard.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, you know? And again, it's very, very precarious. You don't post a video for 2 months and you're done.
Yeah. Or you can be like Lana Del Rey and you make your own video to your song and it has 295 million views on YouTube. Like 295 million views just off of ad revenue would be enough for almost everybody to retire comfortably with. Like it's so much money.
There aren't a lot of Lana Del Reys.
Well, yeah, but there's nothing stopping you from being a Lana Del Rey now other than pure talent. Like
But I think one of the difficulties is...
Or pure lack of talent, I guess.
Totally. Although I would love to know statistics on this because if we think of who is the Lana Del Rey of, and, you know, we can have an answer, but it's a different time, so it doesn't count. Who's the Lana Del Rey of the 70s, of the 80s, of the 60s? They probably did not make nearly as much money as Lana Del Rey because algorithms push content into opposite directions. Mm-hmm. You know, what is happening with the economic disparity in America in general, the algorithms push it that way for artists, certainly for online content. This certainly doesn't apply to, I don't know, dancers or sculptors or anything, unless they're actively pursuing through social media.
Yeah, I mean, the game always changes. Like, I mean, it's always... I mean, like, publishing went through something like this. Like, do you know, like, Valley of the Dolls is one of the most best-selling books of all time?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. No. So the woman that wrote it, Jacqueline Susan, She was kind of like a marketing genius. Before she came around, there weren't book tours. Like writers didn't go on book tours. And there was this weird thing where the drivers who delivered the books had a
from
weird
store to store, from store factory to
from
distributors.
Literally the truck drivers had kind of a weird power in publishing. So like the guy who delivered to New York City, like he would get as deep into like Connecticut or whatever, and they'd be like, "Oh, what's really selling in New York?" And he'd be like, "Oh, these books, and these books are hot." So these guys were sort of like influencers of their time, and so she would go around to the distribution places with like coffee and donuts and be like, "Oh, thank you for delivering my books," and like meet everybody. And she would dress up, and she was like, I guess she was like sort of like 60s sexy. And these truck drivers like fell in love with her, and then they would like promote her books to the bookstores all throughout the country. And eventually like people started copying that model, and then they started copying, going on book tours and stuff like that. And her husband was a PR genius. And would get her on talk shows, like stuff that she would be totally not qualified. It'd be like, "What do you think about the distribution of supplies in the Vietnam War?" And they had no expertise or whatever. And she would be like, "Well, this is what I think, and my new book's coming out, blah, blah, blah." Kind of a model you see on like Talking Head model. But then like that was just the thing that authors didn't do. And you flash forward today, every author has to have a fucking TikTok. There's this horror author I like that I've been kind of following her. And it's just really sad to see her really painfully maintaining like a TikTok presence that she clearly does not want to maintain. And she's even talked about it. She's like, "Yeah, I'm here. I don't want to be doing this. I'd rather be writing." I was like, "Oh, that sucks so much."
That is the public voice of me and everybody I know.
Yeah, it's like the marketing is so a part of it now.
I think I want to stop recording and go cry right now. Oh my God. That's so brutal and honest.
Yeah. But then you have like somebody who's like a mid-level MMA fighter, like Sugar Sean. Like he might, Sugar Sean O'Malley, he might eventually be like proven to be really, truly great. He hasn't fought anybody super amazing yet, but like he's making more money than anybody in the UFC right outside of Conor McGregor, I think, because he's like constantly promoting shit with like Logan Paul dudes and the Nelk boys and all that stuff. And all that shit ladders up to offshore crypto casinos, which is super weird. There's all this like crypto dark money floating around like the top tier influencers. Cause there's this guy CoffeeZilla who has a really interesting YouTube channel where he kind of like investigates scams. Like that's how he started. And now he's like focusing on NFTs and all the pump and dump schemes that these influencers. He was looking at them and he's like, "Look, I know what you get from being a YouTuber. I know what you get from being a t-shirt seller. And all these guys have merch and they have YouTube channels. But it's not like I have 8 Lambos money. Like, so what's going on here?" And so he did this really deep dive into it. And it needs to be like a Michael Lewis style Big Short movie one day. But there's all this like crazy $1 billion casinos that are like financing all these dudes. So there's like that money. But that money is not trickling down to like artists. You know what I mean? It's like
totally.
it's like this post Jackass sort of artistry. But this is the consequence of fucking Marcel Duchamp throwing up that urinal and going, "This counts." You know?
Kinda. I mean, I do know some artists who got on the NFT game very early. And on one hand, I feel like, great, get your money. Being an artist it's really hard to monetize being an artist at the moment. So you figured it out. Good for you. And part of me is like, gross. Just fucking gross. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that all of this is what the young woman who plays 11 in Stranger Things should probably consider. It's just consolidate all of this somehow into a way to create a sustainable career that involves her just maybe continuing to be a toxic public presence.
Yeah.
In a way that feeds her.
You know who seems to really be having like a mix between like old school craft-based artistry and existing in the new environment, or like showrunners like the Duff Brothers or Dan Harmon? Like they seem to be like, or even who's the other guy, the $1 Million, Sam Hyde, like that guy. They all seem to have like this interesting space where they're they're creating actual things that people enjoy, and they're sort of making money. Like they're in between the studios and they're in between producing their own content. It's kind of like an interesting level. But again, no real musicians.
Well, wait, are you saying the Duffer Brothers have an online presence that...
No, not so much, but like the thing that they're making the show definitely touches the online world. Like there's entire sub-economies of people, like we're talking about the show right now, that they've created.
Yeah, I mean, although I think that is a product of what we've seen lately, where whenever there is a whiff of auteurness and someone willing to, pardon the expression, play ball, you get Jordan Peele, you know? So someone who has done some interesting things and has some media and creative savvy can go and then produce things, create a production company, and have like a bunch of splinter projects.
Yeah, I think about Jordan Peele and the Duffer Brothers kind of how I feel about like Dave Grohl. Like they're completely immersed in the thing that they love. They're creating a version of the thing they love, and it's not as good as like the Beatles or whatever, you know, but it's competent and it's enjoyable and it's fun on its own terms. Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. Stranger Things, like Foo Fighters are like the Stranger Things of music and vice versa, I guess. Which is, we have a word for that, premium mediocre.
Ouch. Haven't rolled that one out in a while.
Yeah. But then again, like, you know, what does this show need to be? Like, who gives a shit? It's not Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Nobody watches Citizen Kane anymore. Who cares?
People watch it all. What are you talking about?
When's the last time you've even heard the word Citizen Kane out loud?
Every film student watches it. Every film student. If you take a film studies class.
But that's like in English departments where they make you read Chaucer and nobody really gives a fuck about it. Like
Chaucer's great.
Oh my God, this
Fuck
old
you.
fogey shit. Jesus Christ. The stupid F that's supposed to be an S. Bullshit.
Well, one thing that is a disappointment of when we're recording this episode is in a week and a half, I'm actually going to the Stranger Things experience with my niece who will be in town, and she's all into Stranger Things. And I was kind of hoping I could report back on whether or not the Stranger Things experience is actually better than the show itself, which I kind of, at first I was like, oh my God, it's going to be so dumb. It's going to be like the Museum of Ice Cream. It's just going to be selfie, whatever. And then I spent a few moments online to see if I really actually wanted to spend the money, because it's absurdly expensive.
How much is it?
And I think for kids it's like 45, and for adults it's like 80 or something.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me it was way worse than that.
Well, I guess, you know, it's literally a 20-minute walk from my house. It's not like Disneyland.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, the fact that it's over $20 is a little weird to me, especially if it's just going to be a bunch of selfie opportunities, like a fake food court and a few video game and like Dig Dug in the corner. I'd be like, it shouldn't be more than $20, but it actually looks like it might be pretty awesome. And it's interesting. I've never been in the Armory. You know, that's where Kink.
Oh, really?
That's where Kink.com used to be.
I went to a few parties there.
Yeah, I just never went to anything there. I had a lot of friends who worked there or went through there and stuff like that, but I just like never set foot in there. Finally get to go in.
Yeah, our buddy Joaquin, his graduation party was at one of the big sex dungeon rooms.
Oh, cute.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, it really felt like a sexy vampire TV show dungeon. Like, it's all red, and it was interesting. Like, some of the stuff was like surprisingly good quality. Like, I was like, oh, this is.
Well, I mean, they're professionals.
Yeah, but still, like when you think about most like TV set type stuff, it's usually pretty chintzy when you see it.
Right.
And like, I was like, wow, these like.
Although TV sets don't have to get used the way porn sets get fucking used. Like everything's got to be indestructible.
Yeah, I don't know. What would you do with the Armory if you could take it over? They just give it to you, and you have like kind of a not unlimited but pretty serious budget.
I would start a porn empire.
Well, didn't the condom law kill it? Isn't that literally what happened?
I don't think it was a condom law. I think it was just literally just the economy. Just moving it to Nevada, I think is where Kink ended up going.
I don't know.
I think it was just economics, just in general. I thought the condom law only applied to like the Valley or something like that.
I don't really know that much about it. But if people
Sorry,
don't know
people
what
in
we're
the
talking
industry,
about.
we're talking about porn and we're being a little ignorant. And I'm sure there's a few listeners who know the stuff intimately. And please write us in. No, it's fascinating. It's totally fascinating.
But what would you do with the building?
I don't know. I mean, can you get rid of the smell of lube and sin from those halls?
I don't know.
I don't know what I would do with that much space. I genuinely don't know. You know, I think I've just had this poverty mindset so ingrained in me that I just wouldn't know what to do with any opportunity that I didn't earn.
San Francisco would be getting an extravagant laser tag arena if I had the money.
That would be so good. I mean, it's hard for me not to think about doing something like, if I had economic backing to do something with it, but to make like an artist, like a retreat, like a place where there was grant money and artists could live and develop their work. So it'd be a series of studios, live workspaces where people for, you know, maybe like 2 months or something like that would get access to facilities and tools and a stipend, sort of like what was happening in the Headlands. I think is on pause at the moment. Just an artist residency program. I think it would be amazing. And like right in the middle of San Francisco where so many artists have been like
I know a few people who
evacuated.
Did those. I know some people who did these Headlands residencies and they all just farted around.
Oh, Monique wrote a book while she was there.
Is that when she wrote her book?
Yeah. She
cool.
wrote her book. She wrote a show. She made some videos. Yeah, she got a lot done. And actually, you know, Carmen Maria Machado was there at the same time. So yeah, no, the Headlands, I mean, also
it's a cool space. Like I've been there for events and things like that.
But also to be fair, giving an artist the chance to fuck around without obligation can be a really helpful thing. I definitely privilege productivity and I definitely privilege product. But I also, as someone who's been trying to be an artist for decades, I also really respect and value opportunities to productively accomplish nothing and be supported to do that because it births great ideas. You know, that's what happened at the Xerox labs, and that's why we have most of what's interesting about personal computers at this point, right? Is a bunch of people who had a place to fuck around without consequences for a period of time.
And now those computers are destroying culture.
I love them so much.
Yeah, man, my time up in Oregon really exposed me for being a fucking lazy shit. Because I had like 2.5 months of like really just being by myself. I had those terrible dogs, but I didn't do dick except for lift weights and watch Parks and Rec.
If I can expose you just ever so slightly, but you were also like, yeah, I don't give a shit about anything. I'm just going to work on lifting. I'm just going to work on my abs. And then you come back and you're like, fuck, I was totally lazy. All I did was work on my abs. Like I thought that was the goal.
Yeah, I guess though, like, but I had like through most of my life had this fantasy where it's like, oh, if I could just have a couple months in a cabin, I would write something great or whatever. And it turns out like, no, that's not what I would do. I would learn a lot about Smokey and the Bandit and, you know, fantasize about what sort of job I would have if I lived in Pawnee. Like, just weird shit.
Discipline's weird. Discipline's hard, and it's not cookie cutter. Like you definitely have a lot of discipline for certain things, but I guess as you discovered, like for example, discipline around writing's weird. It comes in fits and starts, and it's chaotic.
Yeah, I don't understand like the distribution of my discipline because it is really like outsized in certain areas, and then other areas it's just like non-existent.
Yeah,
I mean that's probably like a lot of people, but I do like extremely disciplined things.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have any carryover into anything really practical.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny because I think about, like I work on music probably every day, and it feels like I'm very disciplined, and from the outside I'm very disciplined, but inside it's like, yeah, but I would feel like if I didn't work on music, after a week I would start to freak out, like something's wrong, like I failed to eat or something. I don't want to be corny, but it really is like it's habitual. I feel like something's off if I haven't hit the studio in more than a few days. So that's almost not discipline. You know what I mean? That's like, what's the word for when you do
compulsion.
Something? It's compulsion. It really is. Yeah.
I'm a little bit like that about my like day job. Like I guess I'm pretty far along in my career through acts of will, you know, especially starting very late. Like I'm probably like 10 years behind somebody my age, timeline wise anyway.
Yeah. How do we fucking tie this back to Stranger Things season 4, part 2?
I did not realize. I thought this was the last season.
It felt like it. It closed off pretty nicely.
Well, it had the Lord of the Rings 14 endings, you know?
It kind of did.
Yeah. But I
thought, You know what? I didn't think of it that way, but that unconsciously, that probably contributed to my feeling like this has got to be the end because everything's got a bow on it.
Yeah. I thought the lamest of the 14 endings, though, was Dustin and Eddie Munson's uncle. It's like this character
Who?
Okay, so Eddie Munson, the heavy metal kid that dies.
Yes.
His uncle is putting up flyers, which seems very out of character for that character who is sort of like seemed to not give a fuck about him the whole time.
Yep.
And now he's like, I'm going to keep putting these flyers up, and as long as people write on them, devil shit, I'll just keep it on. And you're like, okay, where's this coming from? And then Dustin has this like, I was with him, which opens a lot of questions for anyone, especially the authorities. You know? Yes. And it's like, and he was great at the end, but he can't really say like, oh, we were in this like alternate dimension.
He literally killed evil bats with the power of heavy metal.
But didn't really necessarily need to go out like that either. Like sort of like, like kind of a silly death, really. You know, he could have made it probably. Yeah, it's like chose to just fuck up like this. And then Robin and her crush at the very end was like, I'd be curious if other people thought it was satisfying or not. Like I kind of felt like kind of cold about it because it's like, okay, wait, she just had this boyfriend, which doesn't mean anything, obviously, but
I probably don't have a very fair view of this because I feel very uninvested in most of the time, most of the plot lines in this series where I genuinely can't tell most of the characters apart from each other and what their story is. Like, what's the redhead's name?
Max.
And what's the black kid's name?
Lucas.
In the last few episodes where he was like by her side and really, I was just like, wait, were they a couple or something? Like, I just didn't remember that.
A lot of their like relationship kind of happened off camera.
Okay.
So you sort of weren't as invested to say like between whatever the main kid in 11, their relationship, which you sort of see develop on the screen.
Right.
But there were things like I thought were kind of interesting, like the dissolution of the Byers kids' relationship with the main girl who sort of was semi-rekindling this relationship, this very traditional relationship with Steve that I thought was kind of me. He's like, I want to go drive a Winnebago around and have a bunch of kids and shit. And she's kind of into it, you know, despite the fact that she's sort of this, you know, sort of like a young career woman trying to be like a newsie or whatever, you know, she's trying to do. It was kind of that, but it never gets really reconciled. And like, I thought that stuff, I liked how it kind of landed messy a little bit. And then Robin, if she is having this flirtation with even a straight girl, it kind of mirrors her and Steve's relationship where Steve had a crush on her and she was like, you know, not unless you're a scissor sister, bro. And, you know, so it would be kind of, I think the show sets up for that.
I think even, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask you what you thought of Will's painful, constantly nearly coming out through the whole, like the one character with the bowl cut.
Yeah.
He's always like about to cry.
Completely invisible to me.
Yeah.
Actually, our Jeremy Lassen was talking about this and I had no idea what he was talking about. So I just missed all of the possible queer subtext.
There's definitely like a lot of queer subtext, but it was really interesting to me that like this comes out during Pride Month.
Yeah.
Every single major thing has to have like Thor's gay now or whatever. Like there's such a push to have it front and center. And I think fine, you know, like I don't care. Like you know, I'm here for it. But it sort of gets like kind of cut off the whole time. It's almost like funny to where it's like they never really let it happen. And in this moment, it would have been so easy to make him be like, yes, I'm going to save the day. Like, you know, like in a really terrible, cheesy DEI sort of way.
That was really uncomfortable when you did that.
Well, I'm just saying that's what it would have been. It would have been uncomfortable. That's what I mean.
No, it's funny. I completely missed it. I just didn't see it.
And I think that's what's kind of cool about it is it's really, it seems sort of maybe the way it would have been. Like it would have been very like
totally.
Robin being
as opposed to Robin being out.
Yeah.
As like this femme lesbian who totally knows who she is in the mid 80s. Like not impossible, not likely.
Yeah.
Which actually this brings up something that I've been thinking a lot about this show and about retro cinema in general is another sort of inference that people were saying is that, excuse me if I'm getting this slightly wrong, but it seems that Eddie didn't have a lot of like posters of naked chicks on his walls, which would have been period correct if he was a real person, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was speculation like, oh, maybe he's gay. He's only got posters of dudes on his wall. Maybe he's a closeted teenage boy. So my thinking was that this could be two things. One is, yes, the set designers are casting that onto this character. Like there's this cue that he's not into women because a teenage metal dude of that age would absolutely have posters of half-naked metal chicks on his wall. That's just a reality. Or is this part of, it's interesting. Okay. I'm going to use the word whitewashing, but using the word white as ironic. So this is something we've been witnessing in retro things at extremes. Do you do colorblind casting of period things? Or are you doing 12 Years a Slave? So for example, there are a few people of color in the cast of this show. It is never addressed. In the 80s, especially, it would have been a thing. It would have been a very, very active part of the social dynamics around them. People spoke differently back then. With Eddie's wall, are the filmmakers going like, we don't need a bunch of half-naked women on the wall because that's kind of tasteless and we did it in an earlier season and people complained about it. So like, we don't need to sort of like represent misogyny in that way to make our show about the 80s more palatable if we make it less realistic, you know? So it's in a sense whitewashing. I think it's an interesting, like, when you do something that is retro, when you do something that is a period piece, you have some choices to make. Do you ignore the very real differences in the way that culture and politics, etc., have changed? Or do you lay into them? Because if you lay into them, it's, especially now, it's going to be entirely about that. Because if, for example, the black characters in Stranger Things, if this was a realistic depiction of what race was like at that time, it would be hard for the entire show not to revolve around issues of race. Right?
So wait, so you're saying the lack of titties on Eddie Munson's wall indicates... Wait, what?
Really? Did I just make no sense?
No, I think I might have been caught up thinking about something else.
You're thinking about boobs.
Well, I mean, pretty much constantly. What I was thinking about Eddie Munson's, I knew a dude that was pretty much like a very much an Eddie Munson type of dude, like long hair, heavy metal guy. And he was like the fucking horniest of our friends. But his poster wall was like Manowar, Conan, like all these like hyper masculine, clearly gay images. So I guess I could see it being, you know, not too much.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that this is some sort of absolute. It's more that when you look at things that are period pieces, obviously the set director, the director, the producers, the actors, everybody has to make a decision. Am I recreating this era exactly as it was, as close to how it actually was as possible? Or am I creating a fantasy of it? And by fantasy, I don't mean Vecna is living in the underneath.
I know what you're saying. It's like if you were to make Smokey and the Bandit now with the Trans Am, do you have the Confederate flag sticker on the bumper?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're making it now, no, you fucking don't.
Yeah.
Because it's objectionable. I would say more importantly, in a sense, if you saw a Confederate, or if, let's say, a lot of America saw a Confederate flag on our hero's car, it would be such a disruption that suddenly this movie is entirely about that. Like if I saw it, that's what I would think.
Yeah,
like,
you almost didn't buy a knife because there was a Confederate flag and a Civil War exhibit in a knife store video you saw.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly true.
Yeah.
Well, just to explain that. Yeah, I was going to buy a new knife, and I was watching YouTube videos about these different knives, and I saw this store that I thought like, oh, I think I want to buy from them.
Maybe the greatest knife store of all time.
It's incredible. Yeah. And it's kind of like a 1/5 museum. And in one of the displays in the museum, there's a Confederate flag. And I know what a museum is, so I'm not totally stupid, but part of me was like, yeah, there's only one flag in this store other than the American flag, and it's a Confederate flag, and this store is in the South. And you know what? There's plenty of places to spend my money.
Yeah.
I don't live in a small town, and it's the only shop in town.
But I would say I watched that video too because I was so enthralled by everything that they had. I mean, it's kind of an amazing store. Like every knife you'd ever want, every modern firearm you'd ever want.
Yeah.
An enormous amount of healing crystals,
which is amazing.
And they even explicitly refer to them as metaphysical crystals and rocks, which I thought was hilarious, and a better selection than any shop in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like huge. Yeah, but they had other battle flags from there. They had like Japanese battle flags and stuff like that.
All
yeah.
Right.
So I think you would have been safe ordering from them.
Safe.
But I also, and this is like a conversation that's almost not even worth having. I still think that a lot of people's fondness for the Confederate flag has almost everything to do with the Dukes of Hazzard. I think most people who are like, fuck yeah, Confederate flag, it has so much to do with just like seeing it jump over fucking rivers with the police in hot pursuit than it does any sort of like, my grandpappy fought for the South. I mean, that's for sure out there. For sure, but I think...
Sorry, are you saying literally just Dukes of Hazzard, or do you mean Dukes of Hazzard and Lynyrd Skynyrd and this and that, and none of it is directly about the Confederacy? It's more just sort of like an ambient,
I think
cultural
it's
icon.
kind of like more of like, it's more like that. I think a lot of people, and this is, you could certainly make this criticism that they were not processing that symbol with any level of concern for other people or historical depth, and that can be its own problem. But I think it's also, when you think about intent and motivation, most people would be surprised to find out how little people attach to it. Like there's a lot of people out there who like any appearance of it indicates a level of crypto-fascism and intent that is insidious always. I just think that's not the case.
Yeah, that's fair enough, but I think there's also a level at which it exists where if you were sporting a swastika and someone called you on it, you're like, what? It's an Indian sacred symbol. Like,
that's totally different. That's not the same. Like, well, I think it would...
The way it's the same for me is that I am attaching my significance to it, and it's overriding its greater significance and the way that it is more greatly perceived in the world.
And look, I'm not saying, one thing that's different is the Confederate flag that people are rocking is literally the same as that was flown by the South. And that's different than these weirdos that are like obsessed with like reclaiming the swastika. They're almost never using like a Nazi battle flag to do it. It's always like, here's my Tibetan prayer wheel. And I think that's just a different thing. It's mostly like the patchouli clad, too many ring fingered weirdo modern primitivist type that is into that, and but yeah, I think it's more about like, I mean, who knows, but I guess what I'm getting to is like, if I'm making the show with the Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit, you got to think about like the modern audience. Like, even though I love that car as is and I hate changing shit, I would probably change it. But at the same time, I was fucking furious that they changed the patch on the back of Tom Cruise's jacket for Top Gun 2 for a second when it was going to be a Chinese audience,
right,
or a Chinese company like funding it. I was like, this is I will not watch this movie.
Yep.
And thank God that didn't happen. So now I can enjoy this American cinema masterpiece.
Wait, that patch is actually on his jacket?
It's actually on his jacket.
Interesting.
They had CGI'd it out.
And then they put it back.
And it was always on there, but they had changed it in CGI to appeal to the Chinese Communist Party.
Right.
Yeah. Which is fucking haram.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So getting back to the way that this works in like Stranger Things and other dated things, I mean, I just think it's really fascinating that you got to draw a line somewhere. You have to make decisions.
Yeah.
And some of them are just political, and then you have to sort of go like, well, am I making these political choices on how to represent the past just to dodge current political bullets? And or is it just, again, if I saw a Confederate flag on our hero's car, I would not be able to think about anything else for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it depends. And I think that's fair. Like if you're making a movie for a modern audience, you don't have the Confederate flag on it. If I'm buying that car as it appeared in the movie as a collector's item, I want the fucking thing on it. Just because that's how it was at the time.
Right.
It's just different. Like mass audiences, you have to consider it, even if it is to your mind silly. Like,
right.
But I'm trying to make that cheddar, so that flag's got to go.
But what's also weird is this is something that really bothered me about season 4, and I feel like season 4 did it more than the previous seasons. Maybe there are a lot of moments that are asynchronous. What would be the word? Not to the time period. Oh my God, where's my brain? Anachronistic. Thank you. Like one of the times someone's like, "You got this." Like nobody said you got this in the 80s. Literally those three words were not said consecutively in that era. There are a bunch of sort of like, were the writers too young? So, I mean, that's another thing that's weird being my age and watching things take place in the 80s when there are these anomalies. And it's like, well, is that on purpose? Or is that because this person's too young to know that that's not true? I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's probably intentionally. Like, I think dialogue especially has to be tuned to the ear of the audience at the time and place. Like, for example, in Deadwood, they wrote the first few seasons of Deadwood with period correct swearing and cursing. And they shot it and they were like, these motherfuckers all sound like Yosemite Sam. And it sounds retarded. And then they were like, well, let's just add some fucks and shitheads and whatnot in here. And then I think it serves the audience at the time to hear it in their tone. I think it's helpful.
Sure. I'm just picturing Thomason from The Witch going, "Yes, Queen," or something like that. It would just be.
Yeah, it'd be pretty funny. Or like the goat like knocks a kid down and the mother goes, "No, you didn't."
Exactly.
I don't know. Like I was so happy to see the show kind of end on a high note and be fun again.
I agree.
And then I definitely have to consider how much the mushrooms helped me enjoy it.
I'm so happy for you both. You and the entities.
I definitely felt like I was seeing secret missions or secret messages from the beyond in it.
Really?
They were connecting to my current situation.
Did you bring any of them back with you?
I did.
Do we have anything else?
Like for Stranger Things 4, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of man, Argyle, I guess I'll credit where credit's due.
Right. Yeah. I feel like he redeemed himself. Right?
I really like shit on that character in the last.
He was pretty
episode.
rough.
Yeah, it was pretty lame, but he did do exactly what I like. And maybe I might even just be like praising a cliche in a roundabout way, which is like the stoner sees beyond or whatever.
It's a cliche you're invested in.
Yeah. But I also feel like it's doing the work of undoing a lot of previous cliches. So it's,
sure.
Perhaps it's the, I don't know, who knows what it is. But I thought he kind of redeemed himself. But the one thing I thought was kind of goofy was like is this how pineapple pizza gets invented?
Right.
It's like that's the true horror unleashed upon the world.
I did, again, another sort of despite myself thought the other Surfer Boy pizza, like Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. He just knows he can go there and depend on the Pizza Boy Brotherhood to help him out of a jam with lots of salt.
Yeah, I don't know how I felt about it. At that point, I was so fucking high. And I was laughing so hard.
Well, it was
thing.
incredibly dumb.
Yeah,
and
it was super dumb.
I think that a lot of what happened in season 4 that bothered me, a lot of the times I felt like it was dumb and not funny. And Master of Puppets and Surfer Boy Pizza Underground Brotherhood, I thought were dumb and funny.
You know, they were like their own thing, kind of like you've never seen anybody like save the day by playing Master of Puppets on top of a trailer in an underground dimension. It's kind of like a rad, pretty even much. As nostalgic as it is, it's thoroughly owned by this franchise. You know, it's such a major cinematic moment for this thing. I mean, it's a thing. And then the Surfer Boy Pizza thing is kind of the same thing. Like they've gone to the trouble of like inventing this whole thing. Like, did you know if you call the number on the side of the van, it's him picking up on the other line and going through this whole rambling stoner thing? It's pretty fun. Like you call it up. I thought this last couple seasons were just like totally tuned to my sensibilities and maybe the broader sensibilities of the show.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, even to the point that like Vecna, did you see how he got into character by listening to Dark Throne and Sun O on repeat for like hours? I was like,
sure.
And once I realized like, oh, Vecna is like a black metal band, I was like, his intolerable corniness made a lot more sense to me. And I was just thinking like, oh, like he would probably shoot his album cover in the upside down, like in the Alien Dimension. There were just things about it that I just started to really just appreciate more.
Have you seen the movie Day of the Beast?
I don't think so.
I would recommend we cover it and nobody's seen it here. It's just never really got good distribution and attention here. But I believe it's Spanish. And the plot is basically like a fighting the devil plot, but the protagonist goes basically to a heavy metal record store and enlists the help of the local Hesher, who has profound knowledge of the darkness to help vanquish evil. It's pretty good, but not unlike that part of the plot line.
I think one of the best metal-oriented horror movies is 976 Evil.
God, I haven't seen that in a while.
I think if I can remember correctly, like Robert Englund's in it, but there's a character who's like a Hesher that becomes like I mean, it's hard for me to say it's one of the best, but now that I can barely remember it. But I remember renting it one night when I was a little kid, and I was like, man, this is the fucking coolest movie ever. And we called 976 Evil to see if anybody picked up. It was very, like, oh, should we call it? Should we call it?
Did you?
Yeah.
And what'd you get?
It was like, I can't remember. It was like the word evil also spelled something else. You know what I mean? So it was like whatever that other thing was at the time. It definitely wasn't evil.
Yeah.
It reminds me of one of the weirdest jobs I ever applied for. Was a phone tarot card reader.
Oh,
but it was like a kind of a scam. Like, so it was like when you're like in the 90s, when you wanted a job, you would look at the paper and you'd look at things and it was like tarot card reader, make good money. I was like, oh, I'm an occultist. This is my jam for sure. I'd rather be doing this than working at McDonald's. So I went and looked at it, and basically it was this whole scam where they like sold you like a phone headset and a pack of tarot cards and a book that was like to interpret them. And it was like $200 for that whole setup, which in the 90s was like a fucking fortune.
Yeah.
And then you would just sit on the other line and wait for people to call you. And they're like, well, the longer you can keep people on the phone. And I was, committed to the dark arts at the time. And I was like, this deck is trash. Why wouldn't I use the Crowley deck? And they're like, no. Like, like all this nonsense.
Amazing.
And then I pretty much immediately sussed it out as a scam.
Yeah.
Because I've always been good at spy. But it was such a weird thing. I feel like Louisiana like had so many scam businesses like that. Even to this day, I'll see friends' wives like periodically invested in multi-level marketing. You're like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like,
that makes me really sad.
That makes me sad too.
Speaking of multi-level marketing, so I think you sent me a link that Stranger Things is going to be like a musical and a something else. There's going to be some spin-offs. Did you send me that?
No, I didn't send that.
Someone else did.
But yeah. But I went to the Stranger Things event in LA a couple of years ago, though with the drive-through.
What?
It was like a drive-through event, and you like drove your car through like the underground, and it was basically like season 2 live, and it was sort of like dinner theater in a garage. But it was like you turned on your car radio and you got all the sounds and effects, and there'd be like the Demogorgon, somebody in a costume, would run around the cars and try to scare you. And it was like a haunted house sort of thing.
But you're in your car?
You're in your car, yeah, because it was like peak COVID. So they tried to figure out like a...
Was it worth it?
Yeah, I mean, look, to me, it was like there were things that were fun. Like when you drove in, there was like a Scoops Ahoy stand that you could stop and get ice cream at. So I think it was as fun as it could have probably been done for the time.
Yeah.
And it was in the doldrums of the COVID times. So there wasn't anything to do. And Halloween, it was the first Halloween. So we felt very cheated out of Halloween. Yeah. But it was okay. It was kind of expensive, if I recall. But we hotboxed the shit out of the car. It was basically like Argyle's van when we drove through. So I don't recall a whole lot of it, but we laughed pretty hard the whole time.
Oh, it's so good.
Man, a little over 2 months left.
What?
A little over 2 months left.
Of
sobriety.
Oh, yeah.
And the hard return.
So we've talked about what movie we're going to cover upon your return to cannabinoid consciousness, but what's the first thing you're gonna like do? You're just gonna like eat a burger or like what?
Well, it's gonna be on my birthday, and I think my birthday's like a Tuesday, so I'm gonna take the day off, or maybe I'll work. I don't know. Who knows? I traditionally have worked under the influence of the devil's cabbage, and it's been fine. But yeah, I'm just probably gonna go to the cookie store in Oakland and get whatever their most insane, expensive, top shelf strain is and smoke a gram of it all fucking day.
And doing what?
I'm just laying around, man. Just enjoying the altered state of consciousness.
Yeah. So you're not like, I'm going to listen to this album. I'm going to read this book.
No. I might go see some movies or something like that.
Yeah.
Might ride my bike around Oakland. Because that's what I liked to do, is just like get super stoned, ride my bike, and go take pictures of art.
Look at graffiti.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Is that it?
That's it, man.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Later. Well, I think that I just hit the mic really hard. I should probably start over.